Great. Thanks for having me, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and see if this works. So yeah, like I was saying before, feel free to chime in. Let's happy to have this be casual, conversation about the work that I'm doing and that we're doing at Earth Use Conservation Society, and just looking forward to input and advice and insights that people might have about what we're up to. So I just recently put this presentation together, and I kind of put this introduction. It's different than what I used to do. It's aimed more at a broader audience. I've been giving a lot of presentations to schools and other folks who aren't completely water oriented. And so this may be kind of a little basic for you guys since you're such water nuts, but I think it's important to really set the stage for what we're trying to do in terms of empowering waterway conservation with imagery and data. Um, I first wanted to give a little introduction about who I am. Brian Footen. I was saying earlier, I spent over 20 years as a fishery research scientist in the Pacific Northwest doing salmon research mostly. Spent a lot of that time on the water. And it was during that time that after about 20 years in 2016, I really started to see a need for some documentation technology, kind of essentially like the belief that the modern mapping technology that was being applied to our streets really could be utilized on the waterways. So I got together with some friends and we started a for-profit business called Earthfuse to start out with. And then recently, since COVID, I branched off some work I was doing independently, um, away from contracted work for the business, started to really resonate with me more than what we were doing as a for-profit business, working as a contract agency. So that's why the spinoff Earthviews Conservation Society started. So I love this. Just get to basics, right? What are 3 things that we can't live without? And it's not the cell phone. That's not one of them, right? The first one is breathable air. I think we can go like 5 minutes, 7 minutes if you're really good. 10 minutes, you're brain dead. Food is another one, but we can go 30 days without food fairly okay and still survive. But the one that we're all interested, that I'm really interested in, is water, right? So water, without water, there's no life. This we know. It's the foundation. And as we know, the earth is mostly water, right? So everything's okay. We got plenty of water, right? That is something that is a misnomer, and you'd be surprised. There's just a lot of people who really don't understand just how rare fresh water is. And I know you guys are the Oregon Ocean Paddling Society, so you guys get this 97% here, 96%, 97% to explore and enjoy, but you can't drink it, and it doesn't, support the kind of life that we need on land. Freshwater just makes up a couple percent, nearly 3%. And of that, the surface water is only 1%. And then the availability of that for use is really, lakes about 21% and rivers just 0.5% over the whole world. It's staggering to think that there's such a very small amount of water that we need that's accessible on the whole planet. So I like to say that the scarcity of fresh water is the greatest threat to our survival. And, people would say that a comet could come and hit the earth, and that's a big threat. It does happen, and it wipes out, 90% of all organisms, but it's pretty rare. And there's a lot of other arguments about disease. I think we just experienced what that can do. And deforestation is huge, and it's a huge problem. It takes a lot of time, and eventually will cause desertification and serious problems, but um, including causing scarcity of water. And topsoil erosion is another big one. We can argue a lot about different things that may be as great as the scarcity of water, but I'm not sure um, that you know any of them really are as great. But people would ask, greater than climate change? Is this an existential threat that we're facing that is greater than the scarcity of water? And what I like to say to that is that a climate crisis is a water crisis, right? What's happening with the climate is reflected in the abundance of water, whether it's through induced drought or whether it's through induced flooding. So in the induced drought in the Western US, it's all over the news, right? Lake Powell, Lake Mead, they're disappearing. The Colorado River is disappearing. I think that it's just blows my mind. The Colorado River has been disappearing for a very long time, and um, it isn't. I don't even really think of it as a river because it doesn't even make it to the Gulf of Mexico because of the allocation. It's all allocated before it reaches its end. It's quite extraordinary. Flooding. So then there's evaporation. There's these huge atmospheric rivers that California has been experiencing recently. Those are climate change induced. And also, not so much in the arid West, but well, surely in the arid West, but climate change induced temperature increases on water is a really big problem. And up here in the Pacific Northwest, I live in Seattle. In Puget Sound, we experience temperature increases that cause dissolved oxygen problems in the water. And that's really impacting the food chain in a large way. So, with Earth Use Conservation Society right now, we're focusing our attention on what's going on with the drought-stricken West and in the Northwest with climate change impacts on the waterways in the Puget Sound there. And in the arid Western United States is just a remarkable, has the story of what happens with the water in the arid Western US is just mind-boggling. And if you've never had the chance to read, it's kind of an old book now, but it still is really prevalent, and it's super prevalent today. But there's a book called The Cadillac Desert. And if you ever get a chance to listen to it or read it, I would highly recommend it. It's really technical and there's a lot of numbers and it can really drag you down. But if you just skim through it and pick out the highlights, there's some amazing information in there that just tells the story of what's going on here in the arid Western US. So if we look at this, I just pulled this off Google Maps. You can see all this brown area, right? Through Nevada and Utah and into Colorado and Arizona, is the Great Basin Desert and the Sonora Desert and the Mojave Desert. Um, these places they get less than 4 inches, 2 inches a year in some cases. But if you look here in these green belts and right through the central California, all that is green, not because it's green on this map today because of irrigation and the transport of water from and the damming of water from rivers. So nowhere on earth is the scarcity of water used to support an ever-growing population being greater than in the Western US. Nowhere on earth has more infrastructure, landscape alteration, and resources and human effort been developed to appropriate it than in the arid West. The way water from the Bureau of Reclamation and the Army Corps of Engineers and state agencies, the way the water has been, the infrastructure that's been built to manage the water is mind-boggling. And for over 100 years, so every effort has been made to manage, dam, and transport the water so we can have cities like Phoenix and LA and grow food in the desert. So we're really concerned, particularly in the arid West, with what's going on with the water, how it's being used. So I thought this is a really interesting fact. What's the longest river in California, and how much does it cost really to have a tomato in California? I don't know the answer to how much it costs to have a tomato in California, but I can tell you that from the research I did, the California Aqueduct is the longest river in California. It's over 400 miles long. It captures water from several rivers in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They dug tunnels through the mountains, put it through pipes and canals. There's a canal that runs about 250 miles along I-5 through Central California. And it's even pumped over mountains, like 2,000 feet over a mountain. The energy alone to do that is staggering. And the billions of dollars spent on the infrastructure and the dams certainly isn't put into the cost of the tomato today, right? It's mind-boggling. It serves over 35 million people and about 6 million acres of farmland. That's not counting what California gets from Colorado. We're not even going there in this presentation. But just to look at a little bit of the infrastructure in the Western US, total of over 7,000 dams. Oregon's chiming in at 887. I'm not sure if those are shared with Washington on the Columbia, but that's only like 14. So, but yeah, there's very few, if any, rivers. There's a few undammed rivers left in the Western US, but very few. The Elwha River in Washington State, I'll show you that in a little bit, had 2 dams on it that were recently torn down. And so it's a free-flowing river again. And the Klamath River in California and Oregon has 4 dams on it that have just been approved to be torn down. I'm sure you guys have read about that, heard about that. So that's exciting stuff. But in general, there was this massive effort, and not just for the sake of creating water for all these people, but just for the sake of building dams back in the 50s and 60s and 40s. It was happening just because we needed the money for jobs, engineering jobs over a falsehood of flood control or irrigation. Another really interesting thing I've learned in my study of what's going on in the Western US is that this infrastructure was built and modeled on an extremely wet period in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, all the way into the 1960s. The Colorado River and other basins were getting much more precipitation than they normally would. So this chart here shows these tree rings that they found in fossilized trees in the Colorado River Basin from about year 762 to 2005. And what they were able to do is they were able to take these tree rings and reconstruct river flows. Brilliant science stuff. Amazing, right? And it's hard to see on this chart. There's this light blue. So there's the yellow area. Here's some of the driest year. And this, I think, coincides maybe with when the Hohokam disappeared from Arizona. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the story of the Hohokam. They were around for a long time and then they were just gone. They vanished from the archaeological record. But this area right here, this peak, right? And this line going down the middle is the average, right? So, you know, well above the average, this peak right in here, and again here, is this wet period that all the dams and infrastructure was built for transporting water in the Western US. So I've read some estimates where it's 50% greater than the 2000 year average or something like that. So nearly double the water that was there on the average. So not only what we're seeing happening with drought in the West is climate change induced, but it's also just part of the cycle, you know, the geologic cycle of the climate in that region. But indeed, climate change is making it worse. And, you know, so what my questions were is how do we tell the story of these places, right? I mean, we have lots. I'm not saying that there's not a lot of effort being done right now to conserve rivers. There is a lot. There's individual nonprofits for most of the different rivers that you can see in the West who are working really hard on those systems. But really, when we talk about implementing change, we talk about being able to convince policy, um, and visualizations more than just like a picture you see here. It's a very powerful picture of, I believe this is, well, I'm not sure. I thought that was a marina in Lake Powell, but it's not. Anyway, high and dry marina here from a reservoir that's gone down. It's a powerful picture, but it doesn't take you there. And so, what we're trying to do at Earthview's Conservation Society is, create a way to document using modern mobile mapping technology, and then use the imagery that we collect to advocate. Imagery equals history. So as a fishery research scientist, I used to love when I was doing research, say for the Endangered Species Act, and we wanted to see what was habitat like 100 years ago when salmon populations were thriving in the Northwest. You can go to the USGS, you can look through, these guys, they're amazing, right? They would haul these cameras out into the bush. And ones that use the box cameras, they use the glass plates, right? They haul them, they put them on boats, they'd haul them for miles, and they'd go out and they'd take all these pictures, and it would take days to get there and days to process. And then they created this historical record that is of great use. And so part of what we're doing is capturing what's out there today, right? We're creating a historical record for the future. 50, 100 years from now, what were the conditions like, and what can I learn from what those conditions were like then? It's also a record for 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, so we can document change over time. So, we're using this immersive mapping technology to guide scientific and policy decisions that are aimed at protecting and understanding our waterways. So before I get into some examples of what our immersive maps look like, let me just talk a little bit about how the data is collected. So this is in the Great Salt Lake. I went and circumnavigated most of the Great Salt Lake and mapped the nearshore of the lake. And this is a kayak that I use. You guys are a kayak society, so maybe that's all I'm here, because I know that it doesn't, if you're a purist, this may not be what you're considering as kayak, but it's really an effective platform for doing the work that I was doing. When you have to carry 125 pounds of gear and have to have a stable platform for a tripod, and when I'm on Puget Sound, I don't want to worry about tipping, because the waves can get, the wind can pick up. Even on the Great Salt Lake, sometimes the waves picked up pretty viciously, and you just want to be able to continue to do your work without having to really focus on your balance all the time. So this is just a really great platform. Right up here at the top of the tripod is a GoPro Max camera. It's a GoPro Max 360 camera. It's set to go off every 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, it takes a 360 panoramic image. And every 10 seconds, a GIS location is taken. So a geolocation is taken every 10 seconds. And then every 10 seconds, there's a water quality meter and a data sonde that's in the water. So every 10 seconds, a water quality measurement is being taken. And all that information is married into an immersive interactive map that has data embedded in it. Part of what we do is a partnership with Esri, as you'll see. And so we're able to utilize Esri mapping technology and add data layers to the maps. I also, for trips like this, when I was on Puget Sound and when I'm on the Great Salt Lake or Lake Tahoe or other places I've been, I like to, from a natural history standpoint, really document all the different animals that I see. How many birds do I see? What species of birds are there? And just kind of have an ongoing count of the wildlife that's utilizing the waterway. So let me pop out here and bring up the web page. So this is our web page, and so to backtrack a little bit, like I said, I co-founded Earthviews with some friends in 2016, and we built this technology. At the time, we had to build our own cameras And, you know, we built all the software, all the software, the mapping software and the data collection software. Um, and then, like I was saying, in 2000, just last year, um, 2022, I veered off and said, okay, let's just go ahead and take some of this work I've been doing. You know, when COVID hit in 2019, I just was like, we weren't getting contracts, everything shut down, as you all know. And I was just like, I'm going to get on my kayak and just go map Puget Sound. I'm like, I'm just going to go do it. 1,500 miles, what the heck? So to date, I've mapped 900 miles of shoreline of Puget Sound. Um, and what that did is it showed me, you know, that there was a really great interest in this conservation aspect. I wasn't doing it because we had a contract from anyone to do it for a state agency or anything. I was doing it because I was concerned about the orcas and the Chinook, and I wanted people to see how the conditions of the nearshore in Puget Sound played a role in the condition of the health of the ecosystem. Because the land-water interface is where a lot of this action takes place. It's where erosion takes place. It's where bank armoring is. So that was my goal, and that really got a lot of traction. Got an article in GeekWire, an article in the Seattle Times, and so I thought, let me take this model and go into the drought-stricken West with it. And that's when I went to the Great Salt Lake. I went to Lake Powell and the Rio Grande. The Rio up by Taos, New Mexico is a free-flowing, fantastic river, but by the time you get south of Albuquerque in the summer, it's dry. It's a dry riverbed. I went to Lake Tahoe as well because they're having a problem with water clarity due to climate change induced forest fires and the runoff from the forest fires. And so each one of those places, I engage with the stakeholders for advocation purposes and for policy purposes. And I work with the local agencies like the Tahoe Fund in Lake Tahoe to help tell the story of these places and give them information that helps them with the work they're doing. So if you go to our website, you can see part of advocation is engaging with the press, right? Here's a story in PBS NewsHour that came up about the work that we were doing on the Great Salt Lake. And you can look at feature waterways. And if you click here, you can go to explore the documented waterways. So these blue lines are areas that we've documented in the United States. And that was, you know, part of that work was done with EarthViews through contracts and partnerships with people like the Georgia River Network and also the National Geographic Society, Okavango Wilderness Project, where we took all their imagery and data and mapped over 1,000 miles of the Okavango River Delta and unexplored areas of the Okavango. And then, you know, recently with EarthViews Conservation Society, we've done some work here in the Pacific Northwest in Puget Sound, and then in the Great Salt Lake. And I think what I want to start you off with is some of the work that I was doing in the Great Salt Lake. But before I dive in, I'll just take a quick pause and see if anyone has any questions or comments. Okay, cool. So, you, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with what's going on in Utah and the Great Salt Lake. It is a ways off from Oregon, but it's been in the news quite a bit. And I think if you look at this map here, you can see this brown area that's dry is indicative of where the shoreline used to be. So this light brown, I'm kind of outlining it. For example, this island, this is no longer an island, right? This area here. And this is Antelope Island. It's no longer an island. This is all connected to land now. So there are no islands left in the Great Salt Lake because of how much the water's disappeared. And part of it is climate change induced drought, and part of it is just the continued overuse of the availability of water in the region. So these blue lines are the transects that I took from my kayak. And one of the most mesmerizing and incredible places that I went that also does the most incredible job of telling the story of what's going on there was up here at the very far end of the North Arm. So when you click on the blue line, it takes you into immersive map. And hold on, I'm trying to move some things around. The people, all the images of everybody is what's covering up what I'm trying to show. So this is up here in the North Arm. You can see the red icon on the map shows where we're at. And just similar to Street View of Google, you can pan around and see the area. And you can zoom in. And what's amazing about this particular area is you can see on this map here on the right, this is an Esri ArcGIS online map. And you can see this green area shows where the water still is present. And here, when you look, you can also see that water. And if you look off into the distance, it just seems to go on forever. But if you look here at where I'm stepping, it's only about 3 inches deep. One of the great things about this particular kayak is it drafts about 4 to 5 inches of water. So I can get in really shallow water, but I went as far north as I could go before the water got so shallow that I couldn't go any further without dragging it. And it just blew my mind that it stayed that deep, for another 3 miles before you would get to, dry lake bed essentially. So you can move along by clicking on the arrows, or you can go on the map and find a place you're interested in seeing on the map and click on the blue line and look around that way. So another thing we did in the Great Salt Lake survey is, we took some water quality information. So let me go to this section here. This was a,
Brian, can I ask what water quality information you're gathering?
yeah. So here's a metadata table right here, right? It's on this toolbar down here. And if you click on the metadata table, you get a list of all the water quality information that we gathered, right? So it shows the date and time, the location, and then we're collecting conductivity and dissolved oxygen, and pH, and pressure and resistivity, temperature, and total dissolved solids.
Ryan,
Yes.
the tab above says fish views. When I go to your site later.
Yeah, right here.
Right.
That's just originally, that's kind of a holdover from our very original website. We were originally called Fish Views. So it should say Earth Views. I just haven't changed it.
I will look.
Yeah,
Thank
just
you.
Earth Views Earth Views Conservation Society specifically is what you're going to want to search. Otherwise, you'll go to Earth Views website, which is great to explore. But what Earth Views is doing now is they're just specifically a GIS, geospatial data company that is taking imagery, say, that I would collect or other people would collect, and processing it and hosting it and publishing it into the maps that you see here. So like if I go out and I collect a bunch of data, I send it to EarthViews and they process it, publish it, and host it. So one of the really interesting things about the Great Salt Lake is a lot of its productivity. How much time? Where am I at? 7:12, 7:30? Okay. Go about another 15 minutes. A lot of the productivity is caught up in these structures that are like coral for the Salt Lake, but called microbial lights. And you can see them under the water here and off in the distance here. And in the North Arm, they're just skeletons. The salinity has gotten so high and they've been exposed to the air now that they've just become dry skeletons. And so if you're looking at this particular picture, all this area here, all the way to where you can see the mountains is where the lake used to be. It's about, from its high in the 1980s, it's about 26 feet lower than it used to be. Another element that we have is tags. So if you want, you can go in, sign up, and add tags to this information. It creates kind of a living document of different points of interest. For example, here's the causeway that was built that crosses the Great Salt Lake. And this is quite a story. So taking this expedition was one of the more challenging things I've done in my life. It was incredibly remote. It took, each time I went out 2 different times. I was 7 days in the bush and had to bring everything with me, all my food and water. And then after, starting 60 miles north, I made it to the causeway here. This is a railroad causeway that runs across the whole entire lake, and kind of bisects the lake from the North Arm and the South Arm. And when I made it to this causeway, I had to take all my gear down and haul the kayak up and over. It's hard to tell how steep it is here, but it's like a 30-foot rock wall that I had to haul everything over. It just about did me in. I was getting ready to call my friend and be like, okay, well, I think we're done. So yeah, so tags are a great way to explore the waterway or to add information. And one of the ways that we're working with some of the stakeholders is the Great Salt Lake Institute is interested in brine flies, which is another big part of the production in the lake. And they're interested in where the living microbial lights are. And so recently they're like, hey, let's take a look at where some of the living microbial lights are. And so they put these tags in that show some of the living microbial lights. So here you can see what they look like compared to the dead ones that were white encrusted, salt encrusted skeletons. These are ones that are living and productive, but not for very much longer, because as you can see, as the flows continue to get lower, they become exposed. So,
hey Brian, can I ask, so where that causeway is it sounds like everything north of that is dried up. Is that I guess I'm curious, like, is the causeway, if it wasn't there, would that water flow over into that north area, or like have they somehow managed to divert it back down to the south, or why such the stark cutoff there?
right. So the causeway was built in, let's see, what is this tag say? 1902, right? So yeah, that's another thing, is you can have all kinds of information in these tags. You can have pictures and different types of information, links and things. So it was built in 1902. And to answer your question, they had the foresight then to allow one opening, and I made it to the causeway on the other side of the lake where that opening is. And I'll show it here. And this was right at the time. So this is how the water gets back and forth between the North and South Arm. That's why this reddish color that you're seeing in the North Arm is due to bacteria growth. And this bacteria can only survive in the salinity that's so much higher than the North Arm. than the south arm. So as you make your way to go it from the north arm into the south arm of the lake through the causeway, watch the color of the water as it starts to change, because the bacteria can't survive in the more fresh water. And when I say more fresh water, I'm talking about 12% in the south arm and like 28% in the north arm. So here's a couple things there. Isn't it incredible how the water changes color so rapidly? And recently, the state of Utah had just put in all this rockery to make it, to raise the elevation of the causeway so that it could even let less of the salt water intrude on the south arm, because the salinity of the south arm continues to increase, making it difficult for the brine flies to survive there and the brine shrimp to survive there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not, I mean, I have a little bit of knowledge of Salt Lake, but yeah, I guess I didn't realize that I thought it was consistently salty and it wasn't really used for anything, but it sounds like they are trying to keep the south. Are they using that for irrigation or drinking water, or I guess what's draining it out so quickly?
So the main things, the main industries in Salt Lake is mining for salt and other minerals, and the brine shrimp industry. And it's in the tens of millions of dollars. It could be even more. I could be wrong about that, but it's a huge industry. So yeah, there's little shrimps, and they're not in the north arm, but in the south arm, and they have a huge fishing. They've got several different fishing fleets that go out on the water.
That makes sense. Yeah, thanks. So they're trying to keep the shrimp industry alive. It sounds.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of a quick look at the Great Salt Lake and some of the work we did there. I could probably spend a whole hour going over some of the different highlights and amazing places we saw. And, I probably am going to close this out if I have time with some photos that I took that weren't part of the documentation, with my 35mm camera. But let's go back to the map and let's take a look at what we're doing in the Puget Sound. So there's a couple places I want to travel to in the Puget Sound. And the first is this area here in Tacoma. Tacoma is like the second largest port in the Western US, which is crazy. I didn't realize that until I was doing some research about it when I was paddling it. Some of the research I was doing is like, are they going to shoot me if I come in here? What are the rules in terms of going all the way into the port? And no, you're good to go. But if you ever get the chance, I don't know. Oh, I know you guys, I've done some work in the Willamette, and I'll make sure to hop on the Willamette here real quick before we're done. But if you ever get the chance to paddle next to these big giant ships, you just don't even realize. It's hard to fathom how huge they are until you're sitting next to them in a kayak. So this was an incredible place to kind of really experience what's going on with commerce and conservation, and what the kind of push and pull is between those two places. And one way we can see that is by looking at some of the water quality data. In this particular place, we can chart some of the different features that we see in the water quality data. And here, if you look at pH, what it's doing is it's showing us the pH on the x-axis here. So this is how high the pH is. And then this is the survey mile that's being shown here in the map. So when you hover over this yellow line, if you watch the arrow, it's going to take you along the survey and show you all the different pH levels. And, if you get to a spike in the pH or a low spot in the pH, you can see by clicking on the map what's going on at that location. And here is a spike in the pH. And I'm not sure if there's a correlation here, but it's right next to a giant pulp paper mill that sits right at the mouth here of the Puyallup River. And this used to be, a giant productive estuary. And now, it's a center of commerce. And, like I said, there's always a push and pull between those two things that we need to consider. Another really interesting thing to do is, go compare what an industrialized estuary looks like compared to, a more natural system. And so if we go down here in Puget Sound to the Nisqually Delta, this is an amazing place, right? This is it's called the Billy Frank Jr. National Wildlife Refuge. And it's named after Billy Frank Jr., who was one of the instigators of the Indian fishing wars, which helped start the lawsuit that created the Bolt decision, which was able to have the treaty rights of the Native Americans supported and their ability to harvest supported. So what happened here is one of the largest landscape restoration efforts that's been done in Puget Sound. If you look along this area here where there's trees, and you follow this out all the way to here, this used to be levied, and they removed all the levees so that now the salt water can intrude. And I was able to get access to these areas, and you can just see how this estuary is being restored and the production of it is being restored. And you can see where there used to be deciduous trees with leaves that no longer can handle the salinity. So that's another place that I would really recommend exploring if you want to, because this is off. There's no access to kayakers or other boaters in here unless you have a license or permission from the refuge. So it's a place that, again, having this ability to utilize the work we're doing allows policy people and scientists and others to get information about what's going on here that they wouldn't otherwise be able to have. I did mention that I was collecting animal count data, and let's see. That's a great shot of my ear. Let's see if I can find out which segment has those layers.
Technically wildlife.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Brian, while you're looking for that, I was curious if you've looked into making this data available to like Washington Department of Natural Resources, particularly looking at the water quality levels along those transects. I certainly find fascinating, and I think that there's a lot of regional stakeholders that would be very interested in seeing that as well. Is that part of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so the work that I've been doing in Puget Sound has resulted in Senate Bill 5104. And that is a bill that is going to require the Department of Ecology through state funding to fund the entire nearshore mapping of Puget Sound every 2 years, 2,500 miles, which would include the San Juan Islands, which I wasn't planning on doing in my little venture. So it would also include aerial oblique imagery as well. And so that's really, the vision that I've always had in mind is let's take this surface level imagery and data and let's combine it with other data that's out there and put it on, state and federal maps and have it accessible to the stakeholders and the scientists so they can utilize it, because that platform certainly is greater than our little website, right? So yeah, it's hopefully this Senate bill is right now in the House. It's made it out of the Senate. It's getting ready to go to the House floor for a vote. So keep your fingers crossed, and you can go to the Washington State Legislature, Senate Bill 5104, and comment in favor of the bill if you so choose. Yeah, I was going to show some layers here, but it doesn't look like we just did an update, and it doesn't look like the layers have been added in. So if you don't mind, I'm going to go back to the Great Salt Lake real quick, just so I can demonstrate what some of these data layers look like on the map. You know what? How about this? Even better. Let's go to the Willamette. So I did a project on the Willamette in a partnership with a company called R2 who was doing a survey there. And we were interested in doing some bathymetry work on the Willamette. So they were looking at nearshore area and potential dredging and Superfund. I'm not exactly sure the nature of the work they were doing, but they definitely wanted to document it. This was back when we were with Earthviews doing a contract. And part of the work we did is side scan sonar, and we were able to collect this information. So like I said, this is an Esri ArcGIS online map. And if you click on the layers on the map, you can bring up a bathymetry map, and the darker areas can show you where it's deeper, and the lighter redder areas are where it's shallow. So if you find an area that you want to say, well, why is it deep here? You know, you can turn off the layer, go to that spot on the map and see what's there. And when you look, you can see there's an area here where they're dry docking these boats. And so the tugs are always doing a lot of work here, and it's probably the tug prop wake that's digging a deep spot right in here. So there's other areas that have layers as well, where you can see the animal counts that I've done and other things.
So
So
Brian, are all of these blue areas that you're showing us on the map, this has been you in your kayak, or do you have colleagues that are working with you?
no, so the kayak work mostly has been done in Puget Sound,
Mhm.
in the Great Salt Lake, and then here in the Rio. And if you go zoom in, you can see Lake Powell and Lake Tahoe. I highly encourage you to go to Lake Tahoe. It's a really, let's just click there real quick just so you can get a taste of it. But it's an amazing place to experience. If you don't have the opportunity to go there, you can really see, you know, just how iconic it is. So we're working with the Tahoe Fund there to take turbidity measurements. Turbidity shows the clarity of the water. So we go along and document turbidity and have that included with imagery. And here you see layers also of the different animals that I counted. And if you look at a heat map, you can see this is Canadian geese. And what's really interesting is these areas where I saw the most Canadian geese are areas where, you know, you have like here, a golf course. You know,
Mm.
so there's little bits of insights that you can gain from this type of mapping that can be valuable. So it looks like I got like 10 minutes. Let's open it up for questions, and I can show some images I took at Great Salt Lake while I'm answering questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks for all of this so far. It's fascinating, and I'm just wishing there was Google Street View of all of our waterway areas, because I think it would make thinking about where's our lunch spot takeout going to be so much easier than the unknown. But yeah, folks, if you have questions, feel free to come off mute or pop them in the chat and I can read them out loud for you. Either way works.
Hey, Brian, I just wondering, you mentioned the Elwha earlier. What's the status of the salmon runs there now?
You know, so I think there was a contingent of folks who were like, once the dams are gone, the estuary is going to come back at the mouth, and these runs are going to come back. I wasn't one of those. There's a lot of sediment still in the river. The river has been dominated by hatchery stock because it was so depressed in terms of Chinook salmon. So in terms of Chinook salmon, it stayed about the same. There was a little peak initially, but it's been almost 10 years, right? So we still, have only gone through two 4-year cycles of Chinook salmon. It could take decades to really see the results, but the initial results are, it wasn't an immediate rebound.
And there's a comment/note in the chat, question maybe. I'm still not clear how many people are doing these surveys and the chance of redoing them with some frequency. Also, what additional data do you think is practical to capture?
So there's a couple answers to that. There are people like at the Georgia River Network who have a couple cameras who are going around the rivers in Georgia, collecting data and sending it to EarthViews for publishing and processing. They've done several hundred miles of rivers in Georgia. For Puget Sound and for the work done in the Arid West so far that I did when I started EarthViews Conservation Society, I'm the person who's done that work with one other colleague on the Great Salt Lake. We're about to hopefully get a grant from the National Geographic Society for a documentation project on the lower Colorado River. And that's going to go from Havasu Dam all the way to the Gulf of California to document the extent of allocation of that water that is causing the river to disappear before it makes it to the Gulf of California. And that's going to be done in a partnership with the Sonora Institute, with folks in Mexico, and the University of Arizona. So there's going to be students who are going to be helping with that mapping as well. If I'm lucky enough and have the time, I'll be going down there. We have a fledgling citizen science program, which lets people get a camera, not a water quality meter, but a camera if they can get it on their own, or if we have a spare one, which we have a few of, we can send it to them and they can go collect data and send it to us, and we can get it processed and put on the map. But if you were to look at this map here, this map was created since 2016, right? And so most of the work you see, a lot of the work you see up here in the Northwest was contract work. And over here in the East Coast, there were different contracts, and down here in Texas as well. Some of my partners are in Texas, so we did a lot of work down here. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. And I think you even started to answer. There's another question here. So you said there's some citizen science opportunities. This question says, are there opportunities for local volunteers to chart waterways? And if so, what sort of video camera do you recommend? And what sort of metadata do you need?
Yeah, so the best way to get started doing that is just to get a hold of me over email, and we can hop on a call or send emails back and forth and get that going.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Right.
will you have your email on
Brian?
the slide, or should I put it in the, should I use what we've been emailing back and forth with in the chat?
Yeah, you can use the Brian at earthviewsociety.org.
Okay.
Okay, Brian?
Yeah.
I just created or published a map 2 days ago on, that hasn't been done before, on launching sites on the Willapa Bay. March 18th, I went Platskinny to the Columbia River, and there's this book talked about I'm nervous here, culvert that went to Westport, and it's just referred to in the books. I cannot find a map that would describe when you can go through the culvert. So I just went there. It was high, you couldn't go through it. Went around the circle, went low, and then I couldn't, it was flowing out too fast. The blackberries were too steep. The book was old. I don't know if you can see me if I'm on screen. The 13-year-old book describing that you can go from Klatskinny on the inland ways, get to Westport on that slough. I've
Right.
talked to 3 people that wanted to do that. One ended up going from Astoria all the way to Florida, but he bypassed that because he didn't know what he'd find up in that slough. It's kind of a lack of maps here. And I'm here to learn or email or something. I wouldn't mind volunteering. This map I did 2 days ago, I posted it on my site. But I mean, it's had all of 2 or 3 looks.
Right. So
The Washington Water Trails people publishes their list. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting that.
no, that's okay. The Washington.
It's a different,
I've
they're a
contacted-
wonderful group, but they have a list of, they don't have such a list. So I sent it to them, no response yet.
Yeah, I haven't had much response.
Well,
Besides,
I'm not looking for recognition, but help. Or there's other people that need help. That's why I do the mapping I do and the posting and the blog site I do, because people don't know, but if we don't know, we're not going to protect it. And somebody's just going to push their loader into there and fill things in, and we don't even know it was there.
absolutely. So there's different levels of information, right? There's
I'm not a
the
scientist.
comprehensive level, which would be the photographic surface level imagery.
Mhm.
That's incredibly comprehensive. That takes you there. It's an immersive map. There's a level of effort that's needed to get that kind of information. There's just a basic map where you can have a layer of information like on Google Maps or whatever, and just have the icons that you can click on that show the different information about where there's hazards or different things that you discover when you're on your paddle trips that can be made. And those are super helpful. Our vision early on was to marry those two. And certainly we had lots of interest from paddle groups who would love all 3 million miles of navigable waterways in the United States to be mapped comprehensively with surface level imagery, and that we would be adding information and updating regularly. We thought Google would agree and would, buy us and set us off on our way. But they didn't, and neither did Esri, although they formed a partnership with it, which is great. So that's kind of where I'm at now, is like, okay, well, if we're not going to have this scale on a huge sense, then let's just narrow it down to a conservation element, and let's pick rivers and waterways that are severely endangered, and let's focus this information where it can help the most. And so that's really what we're doing now. And of course, if there are people who want, either for conservation purposes or for a tool for paddlers, want to take a camera, want to get a 360 GoPro Max camera for $300 and put it on their kayak and paddle along and go through us to learn how to set it up right, and send us the data, we'll put it on this map for free of charge. We still want to turn this map blue, so we're happy to get as much information as we can from people who are gung-ho. Like these folks down here in Georgia are just amazing. This is about year and a half's worth of data, and they've sent over 400 miles of data from rivers in Georgia.
You're local though, aren't you? I mean, Seattle based?
Yeah, I am. I didn't go to Georgia and do that mapping. They just send us the imagery and data. And
Brian,
Earth
I'm
users.
curious. Have you, do you have any contacts with the Willamette River Keepers and Travis Williams?
Yeah, Travis and I had a few conversations, and
Excellent.
he was all gung ho to get a camera and put it on his kayak and send us some imagery, and just never got around to it. Maybe he'll get around to it this year.
Good. He's also done a lot of work on the area you showed along the Willamette included the Zenith energy area that he's very actively involved with.
The Superfund site.
Important city council
Mhm.
because of their
Hmm.
the transport of shale oil into that area.
Yeah.
Brian, there's another question in the chat. Who are your most important audiences in terms of driving environmental change?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, ultimately, when you saw the way I started this presentation, I would like to be able to say the most important audience is just everyday folks who don't know a whole lot about what's going on our waterways and a lot about how important water is. We take our rivers and fresh water for granted, and just to be able to tell that story by through a compelling platform, by bringing them to those places is really, you know, the ultimate goal, because then they can help push policy, right, with their desire to protect those places. So the public, the general public, not the focused public who's focused on waters, but the folks who are sitting next to you on the bus, who may or not really be thinking about where their water's coming from, would be probably the number one audience. And I don't interact with enough of those people, although recently through the Conservation Society and through the press, through articles like in the Seattle Times and with PBS NewsHour and CBS News and Inside Edition, we're getting in front of millions of people that we otherwise wouldn't have been getting in front of to help tell these stories. And certainly the number of people going to the Great Salt Lake or Puget Sound or these other places, the numbers have spiked since we've done that. The second would be the stakeholders, particularly the policy people. The work that's going on right now in Washington State in the Puget Sound with Senate Bill 5104 is a dream. If we can replicate that in California and Utah and other places where there's severe in Arizona and the Colorado River, if we can get folks to want to replicate this surface level imagery and documentation on important waterways on a regular basis, that would be amazing. So certainly policy people who are driving the decisions on how these waterways are protected are a really important audience as well.
Well, thank you. There are no more questions in the chat. If anyone has one more question, maybe. I know we're past 8 o'clock, so I want to make sure to let Brian get to whatever exciting things you have.
I was curious about the Bill 5104, and particularly in reference to the Southern Orca resident population problems and the Chinook salmon issues. How much benefit to improving salmon runs do you think this would be?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you. One of the really important things that we can learn from this nearshore documentation, this surface level nearshore documentation, is what's going on, like I said before, in the land water interface. And one of the big problems in Puget Sound has to do with the fact that a lot of the shoreline, a great portion of the shoreline, is private property. And for good reason, those property owners want to protect their property from erosion. The erosion mechanism is called bank armoring, rocks that are put there to keep the wave action from eroding away the land. And what that does is that interrupts the transportation of sediment materials and nutrients to the near shore, and that in turn creates a lack of habitat for eelgrass and for bull kelp and for other important habitat that Chinook, juvenile Chinook fry might use to hide in. It also takes away the recruitment of big trees and lots of large wood that would create shoreline habitat that juvenile fish could use as, I like to call them, little hotels where they can get away from predators. So having a better understanding of where we can take action to limit bank armoring by having this comprehensive view of the shoreline will certainly help in some way, in some manner, with Chinook production, which in turn could help with orcas. That's just one example.
Just a comment. Thanks, Brian. Your work is inspiring. I echo that. It's really exciting to see the work, and impressive that so much of it is you deciding to take this on and support other people that want to do it. But it's impressive the amount of mileage that you've put on that boat in pursuit of these pictures and documenting ultimately the environmental, the state of the environment in this land waterway interface, as you say, and gorgeous pictures in the process, which is also, don't always think of science as having a beautiful element to it in that way. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure. Thank you so much. And I'll leave you guys with this picture of one of my bedding spots on the dry lake bed of the Great Salt Lake, where I slept out.
You slept right there?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Well, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And I look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Please send emails. I'm happy to receive them. And at this point, I am doing a lot of paddling out there and documenting, but with the growth and expansion of Earthview's Conservation Society, we look forward to having initiatives all around where folks are out there collecting data as well and helping with the documentation and evocation work that we're up to. We're just started this year. We just got our 501c3 license in January. So we're looking to raise general operations funding and also initiative grants, and we're in that process right now. So just getting started.
That's great. Yeah, well, it sounds like there's some folks that are interested in equipping their kayaks with some camera gear. So yeah, thanks for sharing that and opening that opportunity up. And we'll be interested to keep in touch and follow your work. And I put Brian's email address in the chat if folks want to reach out. I'm going to go ahead and just stop the recording. Folks can leave at any time, but thank you, Brian. If we were in a room together, you would be hearing applause, but most people are on mute. So we'll just do the silent applause for you.
Well,
thanks again.
maybe we'll get a lot of work done down there in the Willamette and we can meet again and I can do a presentation about some work done in the Willamette.
That would be great.
Yep. And it could be in person maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a good night.
Yeah.